From duendes to white people, horror has taken many forms over the course of human history, and with that, authors have attempted to encapsulate what scares and thrills many a person, and put it together all on the page. Many are unsuccessful in even eliciting a, I don't know, that's kind of scary. But some are special. One of these special authors is none other than Junji Ito. Thunder noise! Oh, it's so scary! Born July 31st and currently age 55 at the time of writing, Junji Ito is a world-renowned horror mangaka and self-described horror maniac who prefers to stay at home. His works have terrified and haunted many an unsuspecting manga enthusiast for the better part of about 30 years, and of current time he shows no sign of stopping. Being one of my favorite authors of all time and one of my biggest inspirations, I saw it fit to do this little series where I'd take you through some of his works and just recommend some of the best and boldest that the master of the page turn has released over the years. I really encourage you to read all of these, so I want to stay as spoiler free as possible, just giving you a basic plot synopsis and a rating on my patented Junji Ito Shit Your Pants scale. Trademark, copyright, don't steal. So, if you'll join me, dear viewer, let us spiral into horror in this Junji Ito Jamboree Volume 1, The Upfuckening. I'd like to start this series off with a few stories I consider necessary, as they all highlight different strengths that Ito possesses as both a writer and an artist. First up is a story that kind of always pops in the mind when someone thinks of Ito. That is Fashion Model. Fashion Model tells the tale of an amateur film crew filming in the middle of the woods with their two actresses, one a good-looking amateur and the other the eponymous, grotesque, and unnatural-looking fashion model. Now, I'm going to say some things that make me sound like a negative Nancy and just going against the grain because I want to look cool. Before I get to that, Fashion Model is really, really good. The problem with Fashion Model is, for a story, there is not much story there. It is as close that Ito gets to just slasher film writing. The thing with it is, it really survives off of its artwork. The art that Ito puts into this story is so good, and just the way our main antagonist looks is so terrifying. And it's that seeping dread that he loves to put in all his works, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But needless to say, I really feel like this story just survives purely off of its own iconography. But it's still a good horror story overall, so I'm going to cut it right down the middle and give it 4 pooed pantaloons out of 7. I don't really want to dwell too much on Fashion Model, because if you were to read any Ito story, this is probably your first, just because you've probably heard of it, so I feel like everyone knows it. But for those like 4 or 5 people who don't, give it a read, you'll probably enjoy it. But nonetheless, moving on. Next up is The Town with No Streets. A while back in his Junji Ito collection video, Super Eyepatch Wolf used this story as a good example of how Ito's paneling and his artwork speaks volumes and just enhances his narratives overall. What he didn't mention was that The Town with No Streets absolutely fucks. This story is just fucking great. It's about a girl who feels as though a boy she knows is coming into her room at night to convince her that she loves him. This causes her family to start spying on her, and I'll just stop right there because this story is just an absolute slapper. I highly recommend it. Like most of Ito's works, it's got great art, take a shot every time I say that. It's got an unsettling atmosphere, and it's just oppressively claustrophobic. It perfectly encapsulates the dread that would come with a life with no privacy. I'm giving it 6 cacti capris out of 7, just absolutely fantastic. Now I'm going to bring myself down from my own high, because next up is House of Puppets, which is, to me, a really divisive story. I really don't know if I love it or I hate it. I do know, because I'm going to give it a score at the end of this, but a lot of people I talk to really have like polarizing opinions on it, and I can see why. Now look, spoiler warning, not for this story, but for my video. I'm not going to be super positive about this, but remember, I am recommending it to you, so do take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm saying this on someone who's read a lot of Ito's works and then came back to this, but this was one of the first works I did read from him. And I do recommend that newcomers read this story just because it's so weird and I feel like it really feeds well into what Ito does. Basic setup is, a kid travels with his family doing town-to-town puppet shows, and then one day his older brother runs away, and fast forward 7 years, and he gets a letter from his brother inviting him over to his house, where he sees that his obsession with puppets has kind of gotten out of control, thus House of Puppets. I mean, it's in the title, I guess. Anyone could have gotten it, you don't fucking need me. The story has a really cool concept, and there are certain moments that are genuinely scary, but if I'm being honest, it's just that final twist that breaks it for me. I feel like it's one of those stories that if written by anyone else would just be a boring and generic horror story, but in Ito's hands, he just makes it memorable just through his own artwork. It's the fashion model syndrome, but it's not as good as Fashion Model. Just because Fashion Model is very consistent with how it is, this one starts high and then just breaks for me at the very end, and that's the worst. But let's not be a negative Nancy, okay? What about that artwork? It's just everything in his brother's house seems so sanitary and so pristine. It's horrifying in a way. Normally you'd think the opposite, but just the way that everything feels wrong just through the artwork is amazing. So let's look at the checklist. Concept, sick. Puppets, creepy. Ending, sucks. Score, 3 shitty shorts out of 7. That's the deal. My Dear Ancestors, besides being the title of my 5th grade family tree assignment, is the title of one of Ito's weirder works. Just is, a girl wakes up with no memory of who she is or who her boyfriend is, and goes about trying to figure out what caused her retrograde amnesia. This story is just a masterclass in terrifying without showing. I always find those stories that focus on the horrors of the human mind more interesting than those that just focus on like a monster or something of the matter. This is a really good example of that. That feeling of confusion, fear, and that unwilling ignorance that you get from our protagonist Risa is just so vivid, and you go exploring and just don't know what you're gonna find because not even our protagonist knows her own name sometimes. That shit's fucking so terrifying. This all comes together to form a really bone-chilling climax, and I'm gonna be real upfront with you here. The ending to this is probably the darkest in all of Ito's manga, or at least the darkest implication-wise. So, content warning, if you're uncomfortable with implied sexual assault, please steer clear of My Dear Ancestors, because I'd feel awful if you were uncomfortable with that and I recommended it to you. But overall, I do still recommend this story. It's really fucking scary. 5 poo-poo pants out of 7. Go read it, unless you're really uncomfortable with that stuff, in which case, read the next one. Now, the last 4 stories I've recommended have one thing in common. This sense of an inescapable danger. Something about the way that Ito structures these narratives just gives the audience a sense that they're watching a horror movie and just screaming, get out, just fucking... You don't need to go to the House of Puppets, just get out of the House of Puppets, why do you keep going back? It's that feeling. That's something that's very apparent in almost any of Ito's works, because he just favors the horrors that you can't escape from. A vampire you can run from or even kill, a killer with a backstory can be understood, but when it's the world at large that turns against you unexpectedly, or even worse, your own loved ones, or even worse than that, your own body, there's just no hope for escaping. And for the most part, Ito never explains why this happens, and that's scarier than anything. That's why I want this to end off on a bit of a different note. A Deserter in the House is definitely in my top 5 Ito stories of all time. Honestly, it's probably in my top 3, but I don't feel it's very representative of his work as a whole. This is definitely one of Ito's tamer stories when it comes to gore and even horror. It's more akin to the works of Edgar Allan Poe than anything, and specifically gives off vibes of A Cask of Amontillado. This story is about people and what deaths will go to ruin each other, and how revenge in the end might not be worth it. Put simply, it's a story about a family in Japan who takes a deserter during wartime, and where it goes from there is up for you to find out. This story is an absolute beast in pacing, dread, drama, and shock. I give it my highest recommendation of 7 slightly dungarees out of 7. While not being super scary, it makes up for it in everything else, and has one of my favorite final panels out of anything that Ito's ever written. Now, I've seen some people say that Ito really is only carried on the quality of his artwork and how shocking and grotesque it is, and he's not that great of a writer. This is the proof that this man knows how to write. This shit is amazing. Just the way it's all structured, the way the characters bounce off of each other. It's just fantastic, and I highly recommend everyone go read it. Before I go, I want to give you all a list of what I recommend for new readers to read, and then my actual power ranking of these 5 tales. So, for new readers, I'd say start with Fashion Model, then read House of Puppets, then try out My Dear Ancestors, then The Town Without Streets, and then A Deserter in the House. As for my personal list, from best to worst, it goes A Deserter in the House, The Town Without Streets, My Dear Ancestors, Fashion Model, and then finally House of Puppets. I hope this video gave some of you a push to go check out this amazing author's works, and if you want me to talk about a specific Ito story that you enjoy, drop it down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check it out for next time. So until then, turn the lights down low, pull a blanket up, and attempt to get a good night's sleep. I've been Michael, and I'll see you all later.